And so in the family, it's where God's laws are taught and practiced. Remember when our children were small, we would fold their hands together at the dinner table, and we would say, okay, time to pray. Remember going in there and praying with them before they would go to bed at night. We'd read them a bedtime story, and hopefully if it was a good story, you didn't skip pages, right? Because they would never know if you did. And then we'd pray with them, right? That's a good parent when you don't skip the pages reading your child a bedtime story. But the family is that centerpiece, whereas you were supposed to teach God's laws and not just teach them, but show them through practice. And so if you want to have a strong family, you've got to practice what you preach. Come on. Because we learn by models. We learn by the things that we see and observe more than we learn by the things that we read. When we watch mom and dad have a lifestyle of prayer and commitment to the church and serving God and centering their lives properly with God being first and then the family being second, it speaks so much to us. But our children are watching. Our children are watching when you wake up and say, I don't care about going to church. It's raining outside. They see that. They see that when you say, it's not such a big deal. I don't need to give. They see that. All the things that we think that they don't see, they see. They see it all. And so not only should we teach it to them, but we should also practice it. Not using the old saying, do as I say, not as I do. Now you remember that when you were young, your parents sometimes would say that to your elders, do as I say, not as I do. But we learn by watching people do. And when you put God first and bring his house into a proper perspective, then you are teaching properly. And so what God says to the children of Israel, he said, listen, the word of God is so rich. He said, when you're sitting down, talk about it. When you're walking along the road, I want you to talk about it. When you're lying down, I want you to talk about it. When you're raising up, I want you to talk about it. And then he says in verse 20, and you shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. So you'll see in many Jewish homes, there's a little piece that's nailed to the doorpost of their house that's a representation of the Ten Commandments. And so as a result of that, they're saying that I'm binding the word of God upon my house and I'm going to walk properly before God. And as a result of that, the traditions of the Israelites were passed down from generation to generation. They would talk about how Joshua defeated Jericho, how they crossed over the Jordan and they possessed the land. They talked about the 12 spies going in to Israel. They would share these stories with the Jewish children. And so as a result of that, it would get passed down from generation to generation. Now, I want you to know something this morning. Your life means something and it counts for something. And you're doing something that's powerful in your family. You know, I realized that I came from a family that was not a Christian family. It was not Bible-based. We were Jewish by history, but more casual. In the same way a person may say, well, I'm Catholic, but I don't go to church. They identify with a particular religion as their ethnicity, in the same way a person might say that they're Italian or they're Irish. Well, I'm Catholic. Well, in our family, we were Jewish. And so as a result of that, there was really no strong upbringing in the Word of God. But then Christ grabbed a hold of me miraculously, and I realized that I was changing the spiritual DNA of my family. And my friend, I want you to know this morning, you are changing the spiritual DNA of your family. You're changing the byproduct of generations that didn't serve God. You're changing that. People will look at you one day and say, oh, remember her. She was a woman of God. She stood in faith. And as a result of that, that may be the catalyst or spark that causes one of your great ancestors to serve God. You're doing something miraculous. When you stand up and say, no, I'm not going to sin. When you stand up and say, I'm going to put God first. We're going to give even though we can't afford it. Something's happening in your life. You've got to realize that God is watching and he is faithful. And he said that when you serve him, that you will be blessed for a generation up to 100 generations beyond you.